I think you could have gotten to this outcome with these oil price ranges if the Americans, after the Israelis had struck, had actually, instead of jumping on board and taken out or tried to take out the 3 nuclear facilities, if they had leaned into negotiations. I think that was a more optimal outcome with less tail risk and with a better long-term trajectory.
Ian, where does this podcast find you?
Briefly, I am in Barcelona, which is a lovely place to be, and doesn't seem, everyone's kind of on vacation today, so, not that bad.
What should we talk about? All right, here we are. It looks as if we had, actually, you know what? I'd like to back up and just have you give us your sense of the state of play here around this military operation, attack, bombing, how you would frame it, what you think we might be missing in the lead up to this. And if you were to go very meta, what inspired this U.S. action? And then we'll get into some of the ramifications and how it was carried out.
Well, I guess the big backdrop, there's the Iran backdrop and there's the Trump backdrop, and they're different, right? The Trump backdrop is he came in as president really, really wanting to make peace between Russia and Ukraine. He got the Ukrainians to the table by strong-arming them, thought he was going to sweet talk the Russians, completely failed on the latter front, and so couldn't do it. And then really thought that he was going to hit China and the world hard on tariffs, and that they were all going to want to do deals with him. It's taken a hell of a lot longer to get to yes, and particularly with the Chinese, it did not go in any way the way he expected to. Xi Jinping was not suddenly, oh, I've got to talk to this guy, I've got to engage, I got to fix this. Not at all. They gave back as hard as they got. So the context is that Trump, the deal maker, wasn't getting the deals done. In fact, even, a few days ago, India Prime Minister Modi, in a ceasefire agreement that the Americans did play a constructive role in, though at the margins, came out and publicly embarrassed Trump and said, no, actually, you did nothing at all, which is kind of a shocking thing for Modi, who has a reasonably good relationship with Trump, to do for domestic political reasons, but still. So the backdrop on Trump is he's not gotten his deals done. He's really itching to make something happen. He wants to show that he can win on the international stage. And Iran suddenly was where he was putting a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of attention. So that's the background for him. The backdrop of Iran among countries that, have heft on the geopolitical stage is that they have lost more influence, both regionally and globally, than pretty much anybody over the last year. And they're close to friendless, right? I mean, they engaged with the Russians, and they sell oil to a bunch of countries, but nobody's out there willing to stand up for them. And the proxies that they had in the region that, provided some deterrence and scared their enemies from taking steps against them have been blown up, principally by Israel, also a little bit by the United States in the case of the Houthis, over the course of the last year and a half. Hezbollah, of course, most spectacularly. And then you have Bashar Assad, also aligned with Iran, overthrown by his own people with help from Turkey. So Iran, which has been a formidable adversary of the United States globally, and has been trying to develop nuclear capabilities, which unacceptable to the U.S. and pretty much everyone on the global stage, but in a far, far weaker position, and with an 85-year-old ailing supreme leader. So they looked like they would be more willing to cut a deal, but they also looked much more vulnerable to military strikes. And that was the state of play for, let's say, a week ago, before the Israelis attacked. That's the context that I think we need to know before we think about what's going to happen on the ground when the Israelis start striking, when the Americans then join in, and then when the Iranians respond and do virtually nothing.
So this is an outsider's viewpoint. You study this, you're much closer to it, you have much deeper sources. So very open to being wrong here. My impression of what led up to this was very base, and it was Trump deciding he wanted some of that macho, he wanted to bask in some of that macho light. And he was inspired by the success of the IDF taking out air defenses and taking out much of the senior command of the IRGC's military personnel, and thought, I want some of this, and was inspired to kind of come in and jump on the metal podium and flex his muscles. Is that too reductive an analysis here?
Scott, you're completely right, but you're taking the baton from the time frame that I left it off. We have to keep in mind the broader context, which is that Trump, when he met with Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, in the White House the day after Liberation Day, so as the first foreign leader he welcomed to the White House, he said during that meeting that he was going to start engaging directly with Iran, Iran negotiations, which, obviously the Israeli government was very disturbed by, but it's not like they can stop Trump. And then there were a series of 5 direct negotiations facilitated by the Omanis, between Witkoff and others, and the Iranian leadership on the nuclear file. And there was a really sincere effort by Trump to get to yes. And, they could have had not just a redux of the old Iranian nuclear deal. People say that. Actually, there wouldn't have been a sunset clause. The Obama deal, 10 years later, it's done. It's over. If the Iranians at that point want to develop nuclear weapons capabilities, they're no longer in any way constrained by the deal. And meanwhile, they've benefited from the sanctions being off. They've taken all of their hundreds of billions of, assets that are unfrozen, all of this stuff. The deal that they were going to cut with Trump would have been that JCPOA without a sunset clause. So it would have been a permanent deal. And further, there was a willingness of the Iranians to really reduce the amount of enrichment that they would be doing. They weren't willing to bring it to zero. That's what Trump was frustrated with. There were many in the administration that said that there can be no enrichment at all. The enrichment has to be done by a consortium outside of Iran that will be determined, and maybe in an interim period, it can still happen in Iran, but the deal will require eventually there's zero. The Iranians hadn't been willing to accept that. And that was when the Israelis start striking. And Trump does give them a green light because he's frustrated that it's not moving fast enough. But what's really interesting here is Trump and Netanyahu had at least 2 conversations, direct conversations, between when the Israelis struck and when the Americans do. They might have had more, I'm just not aware of them. But in those conversations, they were quite contentious. And Trump was pretty agitated because Bibi wanted him to cut off negotiations with Iran. And Trump said, absolutely not. The whole point, you're going to war now. That's going to, sort of loosen these guys up. The supreme leader, I want to now talk to the supreme leader and give him another chance to do this deal now that he shows that we've actually got a fist in our glove. I want to get to yes. I want a negotiation. So even up until the end, Trump was still trying to get the supreme leader directly involved and to get to yes. And it was after that didn't happen, and in part it didn't happen because the supreme leader is in hiding. The Iranians have wisely shut down their internet because it allows the Israelis to engage in surveillance and better target them and the rest. And that's when Trump decided, for exactly the reasons that you suggest, because Israel is, getting all of this benefit from showing that they're winning against this major adversary, and the U.S. is doing none of it. And that's when you saw Trump start to post online, we've got control, of the airspace. No, it was the Israelis. We know where the supreme leader is and we can take him out. But there was never an intention of the Americans to assassinate the supreme leader. That wasn't the plan. But you could then see over the week that Trump is like, no, 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 this can't just be the Israelis. I get credit for this. I get credit for this. And so then you have this spectacular military strikes with the B-2s flying 36 hours back and forth, no American casualties from the attacks, no American casualties from the Iranian response. So then Trump gets his big win. And it is a big win. Absolutely. In fact, it's a bigger win from my perspective than when Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Defense Forces, towards the end of his first term, and the Iranians did virtually nothing in response. This guy was a massive war hero for the Iranian people. You'd think that this would potentially lead to all-out war. Not at all. And now you've got a very similar situation with a lot more at stake, with the Americans doing their best to take out these critical Iranian nuclear facilities.
It appears to me that just a matter of 24 months, it's gone from, I think most people or a lot of people would say that the superpower in the Middle East was Iran. See, the superpower, it feels today, is clearly Israel. All of their proxies have had their hands cut off. When I say all of their, I mean Iran's proxies. Their air defenses have been totally neutered, and it appears that anyone on an order from Tel Aviv can be killed, that the Mossad has totally penetrated the security apparatus at the highest levels of the Iranian regime. What do you think are the prospects of the Islamic Republic falling in the near term?
In the near term, very low. You can't bring about regime change from an air campaign. Militarily, it would require a major ground war, which the Israelis are not going to do and probably incapable of. They'd be overstretched at this point, and it would be politically disastrous at home. And the Americans certainly want no part of that, right? I mean, Trump said he was going to end wars. He's fine with a short-term bombing campaign, but he absolutely doesn't want a Ken Burns style war with American men and women on the ground fighting and coming back in body bags. Absolutely not. And so a regime change would then have to come from the 90 million plus Iranian citizens who don't support the Iranian regime. I'd say only about 20% of Iranian citizens are kind of hardline, hardened supporters of the military and theocratic dictatorship, led more by the military than the theocracy, frankly, these days. Um, but but the Iranian government has enormous capacity to repress, far more than Assad did in Syria. These are well-trained forces. They are well-resourced forces, and the government is absolutely willing and capable. And we don't yet see any internal signs of major demonstrations or uprising, despite the fact that over 30 Iranian military leaders have been targeted and killed in the Israeli operations to date over the past week.
One of the things that struck me was the lack of support from allies that we traditionally hear from after this type of attack incursion, whether it was Bush expelling Hussein from Kuwait, the next Bush going into Iraq. Typically, the next day we get statements of support from our allies. And this time, the only things I saw were China saying they're at it again, destabilizing the world, Russia claiming that we are vastly exaggerating the effectiveness of these attacks. Did that strike you as unusual and disappointing that we don't appear to be either garnering or even seeking the support of our allies when we do something like this?
Well, first of all, you and I are now talking. I'm in Europe right now when the NATO summit is just starting, and Trump's a part of it. And NATO is looking stronger than it has before because there's a lot more money going in from the Europeans, a lot bigger commitments. And frankly, almost all of the Europeans came out publicly in favor of the Israelis to defend themselves and critical of the Iranian regime and their nuclear program. The Finns, I think, were the only Europeans, at least the only in the EU, that came out and condemned the Israeli strikes. Most notably, the French, the Brits, the Germans, the core military allies, all were supportive. And I guess, I take on board the fact that it wasn't as full-throated in support of the U.S., and the U.S. wasn't really seeking that. It was more unilateralist. And the Japanese condemned it, for example. But I was looking at the contrast between the response to Israel and then the U.S. striking Iran with the war in Gaza over the last year and a half now plus. And there, the Americans are mostly by themselves in supporting in Israel. And as you and I have discussed before, the vast majority of the world's governments and population believes that Israel is now conducting an unjust military intervention and occupation that amounts to ethnic cleansing with lots of war crimes that is absolutely radically different from the response to what Israel did in and to Iran. Iran, of course, you were targeting was military targets overwhelmingly. And there was a civilian energy target, for example, but overwhelmingly it was military targets. The regime is seen as actively supporting terrorism. It is widely understood that the vast majority of the Iranian people oppose the regime. Not to say that the majority support Israeli strikes. There are some that would want anything to happen that could remove the regime, but no, I wouldn't call that a majority. But the rest of the world, either were supportive of Israel in the U.S. or they had condemnations that didn't matter, that didn't amount to anything, that no one was prepared to stand up for Iran here. So for me, that was kind of the shock, was how different it was, despite the fact that Israel has taken so much criticism globally for the continuing war in Gaza, that Iran is a very, very different story.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Support for the show comes from Grüns. If you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of trying different nutrition solutions, you've likely had the thought, surely there's a way to improve my skin, gut health, immunity, and brain fog without offending my taste buds. Well, there is. It's called Grüns. Grüns are a convenient, comprehensive formula packed into 8 delicious gummies a day. It's not a multivitamin, a greens gummy, or a prebiotic. It's all of those things and then some at a fraction of the price. In a Grüns daily snack pack, you get more than 20 vitamins and minerals, plus more than 60 whole food ingredients, all of which help you out in different ways. For example, Grüns has 6 times the gut health ingredients compared to the leading green powders like biotin and niacinamide, which help with thicker hair, nails, and skin health. They also contain mushrooms, which can help with brain function. And of course, you're probably familiar with vitamin C and how great it is for your immune system. On top of all that, Grüns are vegan and free of nuts, dairy, and gluten. Get up to 45% off when you go to Grüns.co and use code Prof G. That's GRUNS.co, using code Prof G for 45% off. There's a fear that we have a perfect sort of, or the term wag the tail was invented to describe this situation, that Bibi Netanyahu is literally running to stay out of prison, in that he's done the political calculus, and the only way to perhaps ensure he stays out of prison is to get people to rally around the flag under the auspices of war. And whether you agree or not, whether this was the right thing to do you believe we're in that situation where Netanyahu, distinct to the situation or the merits or lack thereof of this type of military operation, is in fact just constantly on a war footing trying to stay out of jail?
I think it is a factor, Scott. I wouldn't say it was dispositive. The Israelis have been talking up the threat as existential from Iran's growing nuclear capabilities for decades now, and so has Bibi directly. And he did it famously at the United Nations when he brought that graphic of the bomb that he was showing, and he's done it with, investor meetings, and I've seen him do it live. I mean, all sorts of times, right? So, and now that the Iranians have gotten weaker and that Israel's had so much success in going after Iran's proxies, they were clearly beating the drum for we should do more against them. And I saw that in the Biden administration. I'm seeing that in the Trump administration. Now, the timing here, though, did play a role in that the far right members of Bibi's coalition had declared a vote of no confidence. They were going to leave the government over a separate issue. It was over this long-standing issue in Israel of whether or not the religious right would receive exemptions from serving in the military. And of course, they are some of the peoples, the demographics that are arguing most about Israeli expansion of settlements in the West Bank and Gaza and all of this stuff. And yet they don't serve in the military. And that has been a real cause of anger for a lot of the Israeli population, including Likud voters, which is, of course, Netanyahu's party. And he was increasingly trying to find a way to square the circle, and kept stalling on it. Finally, there was going to be this legislation passed that was going to put significant fines, penalties on those that didn't serve, and the right wing parties were going to bolt as a consequence. That would have brought the government down. It would have led to another election months away, and if Bibi had lost that election, and decent chance he would have, then he'd be out and he'd be facing jail time. Now, once the war with Iran was on the table, and he brought that to Trump, and Trump gave him at least the flashing yellow light, if not probably a direct green to go ahead and attack. And towards the end, it was certainly a green. That then brought the far right parties to vote in favor of Bibi continuing to head the government. So the vote of no confidence didn't pass through, and he's up in charge again. So yes, I think the timing of the war starting was linked to the likelihood that otherwise his government would have fallen. But I would not call that the principal driver of Iran's vulnerability to and Israel's decision to attack the nuclear program and the military leadership. I mean, I know that's a little nuanced, but I hope you see the kind of the difference there.
It feels as if so far the Iranian response has been similar to the response to the attacks on Hezbollah, has been somewhat performative. And that is, I, being Khomeini, need to show that I still have my mojo, but I do not want to risk escalation. And that it's mostly, and it looks, the oil markets have yawned. The stock market doesn't care. It believes that the market, when it gets it wrong, believes that, okay, they've had their weak flex, attacking or sending missiles into U.S. installations in Qatar and Iraq, but they're not meaningful enough to escalate. Is that your sense of what's going on right now?
That is not my sense of how the Iranians responded to Israel, right? Lots and lots of drone strikes, none of which got through, and missile strikes, many of which got through, about probably 5% of their missile strikes. And, their hope was that they were going to deplete Israeli interceptors to a degree that they'd be able to hit Israel harder. So they were trying to kill a lot of Israelis, and they wanted to hit military targets, but I mean, they were also aiming for anything they could hit, right? I mean, they were going for urban centers too. And they just didn't have the capabilities. But this was not. I mean, the Israelis are, assassinating their leaders. They assassinated also the lead nuclear negotiator. They were hitting so much military capability, including lots of the ballistic missile launchers that are critical to Iran's own deterrence. They hit the nuclear program above ground, all of those things. So Iran was not, in my view, restrained in how they hit Israel back, but Iran was restrained in every other way. They certainly have the ability to block the Straits of Hormuz for a period of weeks if they wanted to. Now, the U.S. has a massive amount of naval and air power that they've redirected to the Gulf. In fact, more right now than at any point since the war in Iraq. And so it wouldn't be, you'd be able to escort some tankers pretty quickly, and you'd be able to get the straits cleared probably within a month. But they didn't do any of that. And they didn't launch any attacks against Gulf energy production, nor did they authorize or order their proxies to do so. They didn't go after U.S. bases in the region until after the Americans were involved, nor did they try major cyber attacks or assassinations against non-Israelis. So, I mean, all of this, sleeper cells, people talk about potential terrorism, nothing. And then when the Americans are directly involved and launch attacks, including against Fordo, which is, the crown jewel of Iran's nuclear capabilities, Iran's response, as you suggest, is purely performative. It is purely for their own domestic popular consumption. And they launch a whole bunch of missiles at the Al Udeid base in Qatar, which is the most well-defended U.S. base in the entire region. THAAD missile defense, Patriot missile defense, Qatari defensive capabilities, and U.S. air defense destroyer capabilities right off the coast. And they tell the Americans through the Qataris in advance. So it is very obvious that they are intending to do everything possible not to further escalate, not to risk American casualties. This is, frankly, given the briefings that Trump had received over the course of the week as he was thinking about these strikes and how vulnerable U.S. servicemen and women in Iraq were to Shia militias attacking, how vulnerable American servicemen and women in the base in Djibouti would be to the Houthis launching short-range missiles just across the Red Sea Channel. Trump was actually given a fair amount of pause about ordering these strikes because he was worried about Americans getting killed and didn't want a broader war. He was also concerned that he might not be able to fully take out Fordo. That was the other thing that made him wait, and gave him some concerns. Maybe I don't want to do this because, I mean, there was a lot of back and forth internally with Trump and with his broad suite of advisors on whether or not he wanted to do this. But the Iranians, again, to be clear, Scott, the Iranian response was as restrained as humanly imaginable, given what the United States and Israel over the course of the week had done.
In terms of options on the table for Khomeini and his government, one, respond or create chaos in the Straits of Hormuz. Two, overt aggressive acts against the United States, whether it's going after military installations in the region or illuminating terrorist cells, what have you. Or three, continuing to attack Israel. It strikes me that if they shut down the Straits of Hormuz, they're alienating the wrong people. They're being heavy-handed with the wrong people. That would mostly hurt China and India. The U.S. doesn't get that much oil through the Straits of Hormuz. Now, if it spiked oil, obviously we would feel that at the pump, but it feels to me they would be being heavy-handed with the wrong people. Two, it seems as if they're not looking to gin up or escalate with the United States. So isn't it likely that 90+% of the ire or response will be focused on one place and one group of people, and that's Israel?
No, I don't think of it exactly that way. I mean, first, I agree that it's very, very unlikely that they're going to hit the Straits or the Americans going forward. And of course, if oil prices go up, I mean, yes, the Chinese are buying the oil, but I mean, oil is a global market. And that could potentially bring the world into a one-quarter recession, which is a problem, right? And certainly Trump, as you know, you've seen Trump saying, "Don't you dare," right? All caps, like, don't fall into our enemy's hands, don't do that stuff. I mean, he's angry about that potential, just as he was angry about the Israelis subverting the ceasefire earlier today. The reason I don't think of it quite the way you framed it is because I'm not convinced that Iran will continue to have the same capacity to formulate thoughtful, restrained policy over the next 6-12 months that they have over the last month, right? I mean, if Iran starts getting desperate, again, if they can't communicate well, we saw with Hezbollah, the Israelis took out their ability to communicate. They scared the leadership, they decapitated the leadership. And so, I mean, Hezbollah was no longer able to formulate, sort of strategic policy for the organization as a whole. What happens if that's true with Iran? I mean, if they kill the supreme leader, which some Israelis in leadership have said they are inclined to do, though Trump would be very angry about it, at least as long as a ceasefire is in place. But beyond that, with all the military leaders getting killed, and not being able to effectively communicate, what happens if the command and control structure in Iran starts to break down? What happens if we start to see rogue actions from smaller numbers of Iranian leaders? That's a very different situation. That makes it much easier to pay off some Shia in Iraq to take pot shots on American bases and kill 10, 20, 50 American servicemen and women, right? That makes it much easier to pay off and support a suicide bomber or 5 or 10, in the Middle East or in Europe, or maybe even the United States. That makes it much easier to harass tankers, to blow up a couple, that would cause a spike in oil prices. I mean, all of those things, I think, become more plausible as the Iranians get weaker and more vulnerable. And even though I don't see the Iranian regime collapsing, there's a very big distance between the regime is gone to the supreme leader, together with a coherent military leadership for the IRGC, are able to sit down and figure out, okay, here's what we want to do to respond to Israel and the rest. That's my worry. It's more of a like Prigozhin kind of worry. Like, what happens if some group inside Iran decides we got nothing to lose? Because desperation leads to very different kinds of decisions. Right now, the Iranian leadership doesn't feel adequately desperate for me to be that worried about it, for the markets to be that worried about it. I'm not confident that will continue to be the case in 3 months' time.
We'll be right back. Support for the show comes from Indeed. Hiring is hard and slow, but Indeed helps make the process easy and fast. With Indeed-sponsored jobs, you can stand out from the crowd and connect with the right person in record time. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so you can reach the people you want faster. And when you look at the numbers, they say it makes a big difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Their data also says that in the past minute alone, 23 hires were made on Indeed worldwide. There's no need to wait any longer. You can speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ProfG. Just go to Indeed.com/ProfG right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/ProfG. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Support for the show comes from SoFi Small Business Lending. You're a small business owner, you need capital to find new opportunities and grow, and you can do that with help from SoFi. You might know SoFi for student loans and high-interest savings, but now they help small businesses too. No more chasing bankers or wasting time in a branch. SoFi's Small Business Marketplace is your new go-to fast and digital solution. In one single simple search, SoFi matches you with vetted providers for your business in just minutes. You can discover options that meet your specific needs, and if you find a quote that works for you, you may receive funds as soon as the same day you're approved. Say it's working capital you need, or a line of credit, or an SBA loan, or equipment financing. SoFi's Marketplace can help you find all of the above. It's already helped thousands of small businesses find the funding they need. SoFi also offers business owners curated tools, vetted business bank accounts, business credit card recommendations, and a ton of resources to help you scale your business like a boss. SoFi, now helping you get your business right. Visit SoFi.com/ProfGPod and see your options in minutes. We're back with more from Ian Bremmer. Let's talk a little bit about the Trump administration and their approach to this. Our intelligence community. It strikes me as inconsistent, sclerotic, and they can't even support one another's. They can't even get on the same page in terms of messaging. Tulsi Gabbard comes out and says, we have no evidence that they're enriching uranium. Trump says she's wrong. Secretaries Hegseth and Rubio claim we're not interested in regime change, and then he starts tweeting what feels like supportive tweets regarding regime change. I just want to acknowledge up front, I have a bias here. I'm not an enormous fan of the president, but it strikes me that we come across as inconsistent, and that our intelligence community, it comes across as just very unprofessional. And in the eyes of the world, while our military continues to be, in my estimation, the most impressive, competent organization in history, that our intelligence service and the way that the Trump administration acquits itself around communications here, that it comes across, quite frankly, as amateurish. Your thoughts?
In the tweets, I mean, maybe if he knows he's not going to get a Nobel Peace Prize, he wants a Nobel for literature. I don't know, but it obviously doesn't go over well internationally. It seems childish. It seems anti-diplomatic. So, I mean, some of it is style as opposed to decisions and results. Some of it is the way he antagonizes individual allies. I think those things are important. I think, like, you've got a great friend like Canada, you shouldn't be antagonizing them the way Trump has, even though he's done a better job with Carney than he did with Trudeau. Ditto the Nordics. I mean, Denmark, the Greenland thing, our top friends in the world, in NATO. I mean, do everything we ask them to do. I mean, Afghanistan, more people per capita they sent than the Americans. And, this is the way we treat them. Completely wrong, right? So that undermines us. And a lot of the way that he handles the decisions around Iran, even if you agree with the decision, is problematic. But, I will say a couple things that should give you at least some comfort. So Trump doesn't like to read, right? He doesn't like reading like long policy memos, but he's been receiving the president's daily brief consistently and frequently, much more than Biden did in his last year, much more. He likes his briefers. He feels like they're giving him good information that make him smarter when he's talking to foreign leaders. He brings his briefers on Air Force One. Biden didn't do that. That's kind of interesting. He doesn't have a great relationship with Tulsi, but Tulsi's talking to Marco Rubio all the time. Like, I mean, every day and sometimes more than that. And that has been helpful to ensure that, sort of the intelligence is largely on the same page with the conversations that Trump is having with principals, whether or not Tulsi's always in the room. I think that's been helpful. So it's not like Trump is rolling in like without any understanding of what the better minds with access to all of these military intelligence resources know and have. The problem is that Trump is so driven by id. He's so driven by personal grievance He's so driven by his own confidence that his instincts are right. And he's not thinking about the second and third order consequences. And he doesn't have a lot of the policy experience or interest to get those things as right as he should. And he has some quite competent people around him. He has some that clearly aren't competent at all. And he's not relying on them enough to make decisions because he doesn't have, sort of favored individual advisors in that way. He has, a constellation. He has a chorus of voices on every issue, which include advisors, and it includes the Mar-a-Lago crowd. It includes former personal employees and people that text them, some of whom gave a lot of money to the campaign. And one of the amazing things about Trump is that so many people have direct access to him. One of the most concerning things about Trump is that so many people have direct access to him. And some of those people, like Laura Loomer, making policy decisions for who should and shouldn't be fired in the National Security Council, like that's insane, right? So there are real problems with having Trump making decisions the way he makes them that are consequential for life and death, that are consequential for the global economy, that are consequential for the future of the American democracy. I think there are huge problems that you and I share in that regard. Now, I mean, I do my damnedest. I have my personal views, but I also recognize, because my career is about understanding global politics, I understand that, everyone has an opinion. It's not a big deal, but that's not, nobody cares really about what I like or what my bias is. What they care about is, on the basis of my experience, what my analysis is. And so in that regard, I probably come across a lot as more even-handed, and certainly much more willing to praise a Trump decision that I think is successful, even if I'm not particularly inclined to like the guy, because what I like, who cares what I like? Like, I mean, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
Well, you're trying to be a critical thinker. You advise big corporations and investors, try and bring this down to a very tactical level. If a large multinational corporation contacts Eurasia Group and says, okay, how should we be thinking about the world and the winners and losers differently this week than last week? To the extent you can, recognizing you don't have a crystal ball, how do you think this plays out? Who are the winners and losers geopolitically? And are there firms or economies or shifts in the landscape that you see coming that weren't visible or apparent 7 days ago?
Well, there's the Iran question, there's the global question. The Iran question, there are very clear winners and losers. Israel, very clear winner. The Gulf states, very clear winners. And Trump gets a clear win here. And I think those things matter. Globally, we are still in a position of extraordinary uncertainty. And so much of that uncertainty is being driven by the most powerful country and by the president of the most powerful country. And markets hate uncertainty. They like good policy. They can deal with bad policy. They hate uncertainty. And there is so much uncertainty on so many issues. There's fundamental uncertainty on how the Americans are going to handle illegal immigration in the U.S. that has major consequences for lots of multinational corporations. There's fundamental uncertainty as to the nature of globalization and U.S. trade policy, with tariffs that are now at 1940s levels, and that with massive pushback from the courts, that's going to last for months and months until the Supreme Court finally rules. And this is a very, very hard environment for companies to operate in. There's massive uncertainty around the relationship between the U.S. and China, not just on trade, but also export controls and technology and critical minerals. I mean, these are huge macro issues that affect almost every company in almost every sector, and they are dealing with greater macro uncertainty politically for their business than they have at any point since they've been running their businesses professionally. That's the problem. So we've taken a significant amount of uncertainty out because of what's happened in the last 7 days in Iran. I think that people can have a fair amount of confidence that oil is going to be trading in a band between, broadly speaking, 45 and 75 for the coming year, because the market's going to be largely oversupplied with comparatively low demand. And that was absolutely not ex ante the presumption of a lot of major players until the last week. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal. But none of the other uncertainty is off. And in fact, in some way, you could even make the argument that Trump now with this win is going to feel more confident that he can do more in other areas. I wouldn't go that far. I think that these things are separate, and I think he thinks of trade separately than how he thinks of Iran, and Lord knows he thinks of Russia separately than how he thinks of Iran. He can learn as he has successes and failures in different areas, but the uncertainty globally is still extraordinarily high.
But implicit in that statement, Ian, is that you think this was a good move, because if you believe that the world is less risky today than it was 7 days ago, that implies this was a good move. And when you use that band of 45 to 75, you believe that actually oil prices are going to come down, because what are they at now? 70, 72? So
I do.
it sounds
I
to
do.
me like you feel this was a win, that the world is a safer
I
place
think it
today.
was a win, and I think it was on balance. We were in a better environment than we were a week ago. That does not mean that I think it was the optimal move. Remember, I think the tail risks of Iran's leadership being desperate and therefore doing catastrophic things have gone up. They were probably 2% before. Now they're 5 or 10. I don't like that. I think you could have gotten to this outcome with these oil price ranges if the Americans, after the Israelis had struck, had actually, instead of jumping on board and taken out or tried to take out the 3 nuclear facilities, if they had leaned into negotiations. I think that was a more optimal outcome with less tail risk and with a better long-term trajectory. But I ain't Trump. And he's ultimately the guy making the decision. And some of those decisions are being made for very personal reasons that I don't think are particularly appropriate in the president of the United States.
So, last question before we let you go, Ian, and I can't imagine how busy you are this week, so very much appreciate you coming on.
I know, but I love having our conversations, Scott. So,
Likewise, brother. Yeah,
I don't get
by
to
the
say
way,
no to that.
12th time you've been on the show. So,
Is it really?
it is the 12th
Wow.
time, yes.
Oh,
So,
okay.
we've all been very focused on this over the last week. And my belief is that it's always the shit you're not focused on that gets you. Is there anything in the world right now, because our focus has been diverted away from, because of what's happening in the Middle East, that you think is a bigger deal and not getting the attention it warrants?
Oh, the China stuff is the bigger deal, and it's not getting the attention. It's getting much less attention. U.S.-China relations, um, enormous mistrust, and not Taiwan. That's not near term, but the Americans making it harder for the Chinese, making the Chinese feel like they're being contained in developing their technologies. The Chinese do everything possible to resist that, to find ways to skirt around it. Massive efforts to get more trade flows with other countries that have historically been more mistrustful of China than they are of the United States. That's playing out in Southeast Asia. It's playing out in India. It's playing out in South Korea. So particularly Asia, less so Europe, but Latin America too, and the global South. This stuff is very important, and the Chinese are so capable technologically. AI, they're much closer to the U.S. than the Americans thought they were a year ago. Uh, the biotechnology and ability to develop new drugs and what they're doing with world-class hospitals and testing. You always thought 10, 20 years ago, you thought the Chinese were like essentially at least a second world country, if not a third in some of those areas. Now they're first in competing with the United States. Critical minerals, supply chain, and post-carbon energy. The Chinese are way ahead of the Americans. We see that playing out with the electric vehicle market, but it's happening everywhere. And so this is a really, really capable competitor at scale. And the United States is right now doing a lot of stuff that is not long-term in terms of policy. And that worries me a lot, and it is not getting anywhere near the attention it should be getting.
Ian Bremmer is the president and founder of Eurasia Group, the world's leading political risk research and consulting firm, and G0 Media, a company dedicated to providing intelligent and engaging coverage of international affairs. He is also the author of 11 books, including the New York Times bestsellers Us versus Them, The Failure of Globalism, and The Power of Crisis, How Three Threats and Our Response Will Change the World. He joins us from Barcelona. And my producer just corrected me, Ian. This is your 13th appearance on the pod.
Case more appearances than books I have done, and clearly that is the more
There you
important
go.
metric.
There you go.
More important metric.
Get on it. You need to write a few more books. Ian,
Oh
thanks.
God, no! I need to do more Scott conversations.
There you go.
At the end of the day, what am I going to get more value from? What's going to make me happy?
We're down with that. If I don't speak to you, I will hopefully we'll break bread and have a drink sometime this summer. But very much appreciate your time today, and I think when this thing broke out, one of the first thoughts I had was, oh my gosh, Ian must be writing so much right now and in so demand and talking. You must be working 19 hours a day right now.
Sunday was rough, man. Sunday was rough. There's no question. Today's a little bit easier, thank goodness. And I feel like I've caught my breath. And pretty soon you and I will take some sun and we'll have some drinks and hopefully a lot of this will be in the rearview mirror.
Let's hope so. All right, my brother. Safe travels.
Be good, Scott. Yeah.